you might really struggle. Okie dokie. So here's just some key dates to run through. So the 1st of July is when you can first register. And you can register all the way through till the 30th of September. But it's worth being aware that places will fill up quick. And we don't know how they're going to lay out the proctored places, the online places, because they've still got to employ someone to watch you. We don't know how many people one person can watch. So have a good look at the availability. And we always advise people to book early. You can usually still change your date if you need to, but having a date set means, one, you've got something to work towards, but also you know then that you've got a day and you're not going to not be able to apply this year simply because you couldn't get the test in, because you have to have this to apply. So your last test is the 1st of October, and then the 15th is the UCAT deadline, which is good because it means for the UCAT, you'll always know your result before you apply. And that's really powerful, especially this year where the BMAT, they cancelled the September sitting. So there's only the later sitting, which you don't get your results for before you apply, which is a little bit scary. Okie dokie. So Sharon's just going to talk through some of the sections and sort of how the test is laid out.
So the different sections that we've got, so there's 5 sections. The initial 4, verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, abstract reasoning, and decision analysis, which is also now called decision making. They're the traditional 4 sections. So initially, these are the 4 sections that were used by most medical schools in the UK to try and distinguish candidates in different things. The SJT, initially for the first few years, it was only trialed and medical students didn't use this as a category, but this is essentially where you get given different scenarios and you have to rate whether it's appropriate or inappropriate on different scales, and we'll be talking about this a bit later on. Essentially, so these are the 5 sections, and now the SJT has more and more weighting than it used to in the past. So before, medical schools just used it as a general thing, but it didn't really matter what you got. Whereas now you actually need to make sure that you're not in band 4. Ideally, you need band 1 to 3. So on the next slide, what we're going to show you, so this slide here basically shows this is a general exam format. So be it you're sitting the exam in an exam centre or at home, so I think more likely it's going to be at home. In terms of the setup at home, so there's a few specific rules that the UCAT have mentioned at the moment. So there'll be the proctor who's monitoring you. So there'll be somebody live watching you taking the exam on a camera. And with that, the criteria is that you can't have anything within 1 meter of you. So you can't have any pieces of paper, any notepads, any pens, and they will be watching you through that live webcam. They've also mentioned, we've been able to find out that they will be using some kind of artificial intelligence. It's difficult to understand completely what this might entail, but in terms of other exams that are sat around the world, we've done some research on this. They can use technology which looks at eye tracking, looks at facial movements. So for example, it could potentially be quite easy. So I could have somebody behind my Mac at the moment talking to me. But the way you'd be able to tell, or artificial intelligence, they can track your eyes to see if you're looking around or whether you're distracted. So that's how they'll be able to tell, and that's what they're doing to ensure the integrity. As a result, they've also changed the format. So before you'd use a piece of paper, or you'd get like a whiteboard which you could smudge off whilst you're at the test center. Now they're doing what's called this sort of like a scratchboard, and on there you can basically, it'll be an online whiteboard. You click on it and you can only type and write things on that. So there's no pieces of paper involved in this, which has made it harder, but actually it's still fair for everyone and equal. In terms of the scoring, so if you look at the different scoring, each section, or the first 4 sections, are scored between 300 to 900. So they give you a scaled score. So for example, the section might have 30 questions. They'll then convert this into a score up to 900. And in some sections, it's about how close you were to the right answer. So if you get the right answer, you might get full marks. However, if you've got close to the right answer, you've got the second best answer, you can still score 70 to 80% of the marks. And we'll go through this later on in the presentation. But when you look at it, there's some universities have different cutoffs for each section. So we'll be going through them. But what we're going to go into now, I'll hand you back to Travis, who's going to talk you through some of the general strategies that we advise, and we'll also be going through the first section with you.
Excellent. So yeah, before you even get into the sections, I think there's a few things that are worth just knowing before you even go in there. And they all come down to the way this exam is laid out. It's very, very time pressured. And because of that, you are going to struggle with time. It's very rare for someone to answer every question and know that they've actually thought through every answer. And so because of that, educated guessing and the techniques of how you do that are going to be really important. It goes against a lot of the ways you'll have thought about exams in the past, because the questions don't get more difficult as you go through, and also every question is worth 1 mark. So actually sometimes doing different questions can be more beneficial. We always advise never leave a question blank, because you might not have time to go back to it. Whenever you're revising, make sure you practice to time. It's really easy to do these exams when you've got all the time in the world. It's much more difficult when you've got that time pressure and you're under exam conditions. We'll talk a little bit more about things like the flag button, but you can flag questions. So if you've guessed a question, flag it and go back to it if you get time. But if you don't get time, at least you know you've answered it, because you definitely can't get it right if you haven't answered it. And then the last thing is getting used to managing your nerves and not panicking. Lots and lots of the answers are common mistakes. They think about what you might get wrong and then they put that as an answer. So if you're panicking and stressed, what you'll do is you'll choose one of those, because in your head you'll make the mistake possibly that they're expecting you to make. The last thing that I would say as well is, if you sit it in person, do not under any circumstances forget your ID. The only reason because they will turn you away at the door, and if it's a late sitting, you might struggle to get another appointment. So you've got this score, and it's basically out of 900. And when you're reading around, you'll see 2 different things. You'll either see a number that's between sort of 3,600 and 1,200. That's when they've added the first 4 sections together. Some universities have a total cutoff, and this is what they're referring to. So a cutoff of 2,600. Other universities will look at your lowest, and they might say that you have to have at least 650 in every section. So it's important to know who uses your UCAT and how they use it. Do they have a cutoff where they don't look at it anymore after that? Or do they rank you in deciles like Birmingham does? Which means although you might be at their cutoff, you still want to be a bit higher than that to apply there. Just to give you an idea, this is the last 5 years, and these are the deciles. What they've done is they've split the performance into 10% deciles. And you can see, to be in the top 10% in the country, you had to get above 2,800. And this has kind of stayed about the same. 2017 was a very competitive year. 2019 was exactly 2,800. 2016, I would ignore. It was a very weird year because they had to remove one of the sections. And so because of that, it changed the way the scores were done. So that gives you an idea of an average. If you can aim for over 2,800, you'll definitely be in the top 20% of the country. Okay, and then this gives you a breakdown of each section. So you can see here the different sort of averages. So verbal reasoning, the average can be quite low, it's quite difficult, and that's normally to do with time pressure. And then the others are all around about 600. And that's about the same for all years. You know, verbal reasoning is always one of the lowest. You can see here where they removed the decision analysis in 2016, which is what skewed the scores. But otherwise, it gives you a good idea of what the averages are across the country, and obviously where you need to aim for when you're revising. And then finally, there's the SJT. So this is completely separate to the other 4 sections. This is the situational judgment, where they give you a band, and the band is basically how close you are to the panel of experts that answered these questions. So band 1 is obviously becoming much more competitive. 26%, 28%, 21, 17, and it's been going down like that. And as well as becoming more difficult to achieve a band 1, it's becoming more important. So years and years ago, it makes me feel quite old, when I was applying for medicine, the SJT was just ignored almost. Whereas now it's actually ranked into your scoring and ranked into it. And actually there's a lot of universities now that are saying if you get a band 4, they won't allow you to apply. So that's just something to bear in mind. It's really worth practicing the SAT. It's becoming much more important. But if you read older resources, they might say it's not that valuable of a section. After the exam, you'll get a printout of your results. If you do it online, they're currently saying it will take them about 24 hours. Now, we assume this is because they want to review the footage before they give you a result. When you get your result, whatever you get is worth talking to someone about it who understands the UCAT, because actually sometimes you can feel really disheartened when you see your result, or you can feel really excited, and that could change your whole plan for how you're going to apply to medicine. We would advise you come and speak to us. We can talk you through your results. We can talk you through where suits your type of application. You might have had 3 quite high and 1 quite low result. You might have had all really high, and you're actually now thinking, can I apply to places I didn't think I could get into? You might have had a lower result and you think it's not possible, but actually there still might be places you can apply to. So come and speak to us and we'll hopefully help you through. So let's get into the meat of this, which is the sections. So section 1 is verbal reasoning. This is looking at paragraphs of text, drawing information out and drawing conclusions from the text. The idea of this is that as a doctor, you should be able to pick out relevant information from rubbish. And if somebody's telling you something that's not necessarily true, or if they're trying to lead you on, then you can pick that up. And so the way they test that is making you interpret lots of information and ask you questions on it. You've got 11 sets of questions. So you've got 11 sort of pieces of text that they'll ask you different questions on. 4 questions per set, so 44 questions and 22 minutes. So 30 seconds a question or 2 minutes per set. For those of you who haven't done mocks and things yet, this is where you'll start to see just how time pressured what this is. Yeah, it really does become quite time pressured. So there's 2 types of question with verbal reasoning. You've got these true, false, can't tell questions where they'll give you a statement and you have to say, is it true, is it false, or can I not tell whether it's true or false, based on what they've given you. These are always quite time pressured. The other ones are free text then. They give you an incomplete statement and you have to kind of draw a conclusion from that. And they're even more time pressured because you have to actually make the conclusion yourself. Overall, and we've only got time to skim over these today, we would say read the question and skim through the passage, get an idea of what it's talking about. What's the whole theme of this passage? What are they trying to get out of this? What's it explaining to you? Is there anything that doesn't make sense in it? Then look for keywords and phrases. What will that tell you about what the writer was trying to get across? Read the question and read the answers and look to the passages. And then if there's anything that doesn't make sense at all, you know you can discount that. Similarly, if you think that perfectly makes sense, you can choose it. Now, the thing to be aware of is that this exam has been around for a long time now. And so the examiners know what sort of things you're going to be doing. And so sometimes they go out of their way to put things in that will catch you out. So what do you need to be on the lookout for? Hidden keywords. So sometimes they'll change the keyword from the question to the text purposefully, so you can't just scan down and look for that word. Similarly, they'll contradict themselves. So they'll put a statement that makes it look like they've agreed with what you said in the question, and then they'll change it so that actually they've contradicted themselves in the next sentence or in the line below. So overall, the paragraph doesn't agree with you, but you think that it does. Similarly, they'll mislead you to a conclusion. So they'll say 3 things and let you conclude that that means that. They haven't said it. A really common one is prior knowledge. They'll state something that they have a feeling you know the answer to. You know, they might use the name of a celebrity and you know in your head that person's a celebrity, but they haven't told you that person's a celebrity. And so that's a really common one where you'll assume things that you don't know. Now, juxtaposition is something that I find is really, really clever how they do it. And it can be really annoying. This is where they put 2 statements next to each other, but with a full stop in the middle. And therefore you assume that one leads to the other. And all they've actually done is put them next to each other. So you've got to be really careful with that. Synonyms, this is where they are basically saying they're using different words, different meanings, and again, trying to make you not be able to track down the answer. Sometimes they'll trick you into thinking you can't tell. So they might put numbers in, they might put averages in, they might word it in a different way or make you make a conclusion and you'll think you can't tell the answer, but actually you can. And then numbers and averages. So just because you have to do a simple bit of maths to get to the conclusion doesn't mean it's not can't tell. It might actually be true, but you just have to do a bit of maths. And it's a common misbelief that people think if you have to do maths to get the average or the number, then it's a can't tell. But actually, if the numbers are there and you can do the maths, it's true or false. Because actually all the information is there for you to draw that conclusion. And that conclusion is correct based on the information that you've got. Okay, so these are a few things to look through. As I say, this evening, we've had to literally just list those and explain them. If we had a bit more time, we could kind of go through exactly what they look like, examples of them, and what you can do to kind of pick them out and make sure they don't catch you out. So my top tips for verbal reasoning: practice skimming passages, practice just reading passages. Um, Interestingly, there was a study where they got older people to do the UKCAT or the UCAT, and what they found is that they were much, much better at verbal reasoning than younger people are. And they think it's because of reading newspapers. So people used to read the newspaper, they'd be able to skim down, find things that they found interesting, pick out things that they found interesting. Whereas these days, it's more that the information we read online is refined, and so we're used to having the keywords just in front of us. Practice reading on the computer screen. Lots of people find it really, really difficult to read on a computer screen. I know I personally like to print stuff off and read it. And so get used to that and sort of how it feels to read passages of text and not get lost where you are. Make sure you practice both question sets. 90% of the questions you see will be the true false count tells, and sometimes the other ones, which are more time pressured and can be a bit more difficult, don't get practiced as much. Look for anything that is a clue word and look for the common ways that they mitigate them. So look for those contradictions and get used to the way that those contradictions work and then what they look like in the text. Always ask why the writer put those words in. So why is the writer written in the way they have? What are they trying to achieve? What is their outcome? Because that'll give you a better idea of where they're going with the text. Don't get stuck. When I say go with your gut instinct, remember what we said about flagging it, moving on. If you think an answer could be correct, but you're not sure, but you're running out of time, move on. And that's where practice comes in. You need to get used to what it feels like to go through one question set and know what the timing feels like. Don't use outside knowledge, we said that. Don't assume relationships unless they've stated them to you. So again, don't think one thing leads to the other, unless they've told you, like, this leads to that. And then sometimes what people have found really useful is to start writing your own questions, because you'll think, how am I catching myself out? And then you'll think, well, that's how they're also catching people out. And so it just can help. Perfect. So I'll hand you back to Sharon to talk about quantitative reasoning a little bit.
Okay, so the quantitative reasoning section is almost the maths section. So in this section, you get a lot of different things, and this is one of the most difficult, and for a lot of people, it's one of the most time-pressured section. So as you can see on the next slide, we've got an overview coming up. The main things are, we feel that quantitative reasoning is the most pressured section, as we mentioned, because you've got a lot of questions and you haven't got a lot of time. So it's about being able to interpret the data quickly and fast. And the thing with that is making sure you've had adequate practice. It's also about ensuring that you can solve simple math problems. So we're going to go on to some of the common questions that come up. And this is based on previous practice questions. So in our course, we actually go through lots of different questions, including some questions that are currently being used or have been used in the past, similar questions. And then we've also got the common topics that have been coming up, and we'll come on to that in a second. Also, it's to do with problem solving. So a lot of questions, some people find very simple. So you might get a question where somebody says, can you work out the percentage growth in a particular investment bond over 1 year? But the question they'll give you will be a bit more problem solving than that. So it might give you a missing data, or you might have to work it out for the next few years and then go on to it. The other difference that they've made this year, so that's due to the online format, is you can now only use the calculator that they provide online. So you cannot use your own calculator. So you're not allowed to use scientific calculator. And the calculator that comes up on screen with the scratch pad will be the exact same calculator that you use at home or at the test center. But again, they've written that if they see anyone using their own calculator when the proctors are watching, they'll be disqualified from the exam. Okay, so the exact format of the section. So what we go through is 9 different scenarios. Each scenario, you'll be given 4 different questions. So for example, you could be given a pie chart, or you could be given a histogram. On there, you'll probably be given quite a bit of data, and some of that data is usually irrelevant on purpose. It's almost like having distractors. You then have 4 questions for each data set. Overall, there's 36 questions, and it's multiple choice. There's 5 questions in each section. And what this means is that you've got 25 minutes in total. So I know we were having in the group chat, there were people asking about the exact timing. So this is the most time pressured section, we feel, because even though abstract reasoning, you get a lot more questions in a shorter time. In the quantitative analysis section, you have to do quite a bit of maths and problem solving sometimes. And it works out that you get about 40 seconds per question. So that's why, again, it comes down to having done a lot of practice and being able to apply a lot of the different scenarios. Alvini, it's 42 seconds per question per each question, so each of the 5. But sometimes what will happen, those 4 questions in each category, they'll be, although they relate to the same data set, they'll require you to do quite a lot of different maths. So it won't necessarily be a simple work out the percentage growth in this particular section. It can be using that data set to then work out other problems within those 4 questions. So what we're going to go on to now is about the maths knowledge that you require. So a lot of people ask, how good do we need to be at maths? Do we need GCSE level maths? Do we need A-level maths? Everyone has GCSE, but do we need A-level maths? Do we need further maths? Everyone sitting the UCAT exam should be very, very familiar with basic arithmetic, averages, percentages. Where it gets trickier is where they start to add in a lot more data which you might not have seen. And again, that's what our course focuses on. It's about the data that they present in unusual ways. So Venn diagrams, they can present in different ways that you haven't seen. There's different ways of presenting box plots. There's different ways of presenting histograms. And it's about interpreting that data. But you should be quite strong and solid in your foundations at looking at fractions, decimals, ratios. And it's important that you cover those things quite well. And then what we've got is we've got specific things, and these are things which they commonly try and catch you out on. So one of the things that even between those 4 questions that you get for that one block of data, they sometimes change the units, or commonly the question will ask you something in 1 unit, it might be nanograms, whereas the data you're given is in milligrams. And one of the biggest problems is wrong order of magnitude. And sometimes what people do is you might give your answer and you might be adding a 0 or missing a 0, or you might have calculated it in the wrong kind of format or number. And the other thing which is really important for this is sometimes there'll be questions where you have to apply logic. So for example, if you've got a question relating to the height or the weight of a human, you'd commonly know which answer you can cross out and stand up. So for example, it's happened before where they've asked you to work out averages, and people have figured out actually this road journey would be 50,000 miles. And you suddenly know that that answer is totally wrong. So you can just rule out simple things. And if it relates to stuff like humans, food, you've suddenly got things which you can just rule out. So that's quite important, and look out for those tricks because they do try and catch you out with different units and different things. In terms of the actual formula that you need to know, these are the basic ones. So we just summarize the most basic things that you must be really confident, familiar with. And it's not enough to just be able to say, okay, I know these formulas, I can work them out. It's about being able to do them in a time pressured manner. And that's why we go through different questions, and we'll be going through in our course different things you can do to try and absolutely nail the practice. You should be able to know these formulas off by heart and be able to apply them to different sets of data. Particular tricky ones in particular can be percentage change. That catches a lot of people out. And the speed, distance, and time catches a lot of people out. And the reason being, again, is units. So commonly they'll give you data in kilometers an hour, but they might be asking you the question in meters an hour, meters a second. And it really does catch people out. So it's quite important that you're aware of that. And then in terms of the more complex formulas, which do sometimes come up and we'd expect you to know and cover, is geometric formulae. And these are the more difficult ones. So not all the questions will have this, but sometimes you might get 1 or 2 questions or 1 or 2 data sets which focus on these. And again, it's very important that you're able to quickly apply these formulas. And we do know it will be much harder because you're using the online calculator and notepad. And that's why we've got a few general tips that's really important to be aware of. So before you do the question, make sure you've actually read the data set, have a look at the data set, see what it means. And commonly, this is where people mess up a question because you might misread the data set, or you might not read the title appropriately. Sometimes the title at the top of the data will say something else, and then when you look at the graph, it's different to what it says at the top, because the top might be an overall overview. It's important when you're doing your working out, particularly on the notepad, that it's quite neat, because you can then go back and work out where your mistakes are. So commonly, it's very easy. It's a very common mistake. You might just be off by 1 single unit, but they've purposely put that extra 0 or an option with a less 0 in the answers. And it's so easy to choose the wrong option. So you need to be able to get easy access to your workings out, and the notepad should allow that. And again, lots and lots of practice. That's what you need for the section. And the reason for that is time pressure. The calculations usually aren't too bad. They're not. You know, if you've practiced and you know the different topics and you know all the strategies and how to do these questions, you should be able to do most of the questions. It's just about doing them under a time pressured manner. And that's why time management is extremely important for the section. And the other thing for this section is that all the marks are equal for each question. In terms of, you might sometimes get a trickier question, or you might realize that it's going to take a lot longer to complete this question. So for that, we recommend that you take a guess, or rule out the dead obvious. If it's simple, you can say, okay, that's not right, that's not right. Take a guess, flag the question, and come back if you've got time. But again, people do run out of time in the section, so practice is key. And actually, some questions we'd say just avoid the calculator. There'll be some simple maths you can do, or there'll be simple data sets, and if you can work it out without a calculator, that's probably the best thing to do, and it will save you a bit of time. So that's the quantitative analysis section. What we're going to go into next is the abstract reasoning section. This was one of my favorite sections. Both me and Travis scored over 800 on this section. And again, this all comes down to practice. So the abstract reasoning section, it's about pattern recognition. It's about being able to look and interpret data and patterns really quickly. So most people find this quite a hard section. It's not always due to time pressure. It's due to the fact that you need to be able to find out what that pattern and what that link is. And what you have to be able to do is look at different patterns and see how they link together and be able to compare them between two different sets of data commonly. So there's 3 types of questions which come up for this. So we'll go on to the format of the section and we can show you what they are. So there's 3 main types. So we'll come on to that. And there's also a 4th type, which is similar to the first. So there's 55 questions in total, and you have 14 minutes. What that means, you've got 14 seconds per question. But if you look at it, once you've figured out, and this is the important thing, we try and say, look at the actual data, look at the 2 pattern blocks that you're given. Once you've figured out what that pattern is, you can then do the other 4 questions or the 5 questions in that section very quickly. So overall, you get 70 seconds per question set. In terms of the type of questions, so most of the questions you get are similar to type 1. So you get 2 sets of shapes. So you might get 1 shape on the left. Within it, there's 6 small boxes, and they'll have patterns. Then you get another set of data with new patterns. They'll then give you a option. Then will give you a pattern, and what you have to decide is whether it goes to set A, set B, or neither. And again, unless you've been able to figure out what that pattern is and what set A and set B are doing, it's then very hard to actually be able to work out whether it fits into either or neither. And that's the trick. And then the other type, types 2, 3, and 4, there's other questions where they might give you a series. So you get given a series of 4 different patterns. So the patterns will progress. So sometimes we'll come on to the different things they use, but sometimes they'll be using colors in boxes, they'll be using triangles, they'll be using symmetry, and those patterns are building. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th one, it'll be the one that you have to work out, and they'll give you 5 different options, and you have to then choose which one would be next in the pattern. And again, they can do changes in shape and different things. And then type 4 is very similar to type 1, but you have to decide whether it's set A or set B. In terms of the overall strategy, so this is the one again, quantitative analysis, the math section, which needs time pressure. With this one, strategy is the key. And that's why a lot of people they absolutely hate this section, but once you've practiced this section and you've been through a lot of different questions with a lot of different strategies, you can score highly in this. So the big picture is about being able to look at obvious patterns. So you can look at the positioning of patterns. So commonly it will be like a clock face, or there'll be certain positions in each set where the data is. You then look at the types of shapes, and actually within the shapes there'll be patterns. So for example, if you've got a 5-colored shape, if you've got a 5 cornered shape, if it's shaded, it means something else. If it's unshaded, it means something else. That's quite important. And then size, direction, and symmetry are very important. So commonly what they might do is, within the pattern, some of the shapes they'll make bigger and some of the shapes they'll make smaller, and they'll rotate these around. But these are really tricky to try and figure out between set A and set B. It's quite hard to explain these as well. So what we will be doing in the course is you'll get lots and lots of practice, and we'll also be sending out a mock exam where we'll talk through the strategy so you can look at them. The smaller picture is about being able to look at the number of sides, the angles. Sometimes it will be where if shapes are touching each other, that will be one of the patterns, or the way they touch each other, or the angles, the difference between them, and also the areas of shapes. And again, it can be very, very annoying to try and work these out, but if you've got this strong set of strategies, you can work these out. And the other things we look at is some of them are based on absolute numbers and odd and even. And again, this can be very subtle. It's usually not in isolation, so that's why we've got them at the bottom. So odd and even, usually it's too easy, where one set's all odd and one set's all even. There'll be more to it. So commonly that shaded shapes, that angles in there, and then you'll have to pick the right pattern. But again, the key in these questions is being able to find out what is the pattern for set A and what is the pattern for set B, and that's where the strategy really comes in. So we'll look at what you can do overall. So general tips for a section. It's about looking at the big picture. So if you looked at those strategies on the left, it's about being able to see, can you suddenly spot a pattern? You might get lucky. So from those strategies that we've discussed, it might be that straight away, you've had lots of practice, straight away say, okay, this is the pattern, you've got it. But actually, other times you'll then have to go into the nitty gritty. You have to look at angles, you have to look at intersections, you have to individually follow what the exact pattern is. And it's almost like having a checklist, and that's what we always shoot at. So it's about being able to go through this tick box and say, okay, is there symmetry? Is it to do with shades? Is it to do with areas? Is it to do with prime numbers? And then that's how you rule out what the pattern's showing. And unfortunately, it does seem almost impossible. When you start off, this is one of the most horrible sections. And when you first start off, everyone tends to really, really struggle with these. And that's why it's important to have a structure and a strategy to do well in these. And again, if you hit a brick wall, which is what commonly happens, especially in the first 1 or 2 weeks, people do this and absolutely feel depressed and they feel like you just can't do this. Don't worry. Send us a message and we'll try and help you out with resources. Just make sure that you've done enough questions and you've done enough practice and you're using the strategies to be able to get through these questions. But in terms of the questions that pop up, they try and do this section because they think it's one about time pressure. And secondly, it's about problem solving. As a doctor, you do a lot of problem solving, and it is something you have to do. And that's why it also comes up. They've now modified the decision analysis with the old name. They've now changed it to decision making. And that's almost an amalgamation of some of the quantitative analysis and the abstract analysis. So I'll hand over to Travis in a second, and he'll talk you through this section.
Excellent. So moving swiftly, as I say, this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And you can see that Sharon and I really want to stop and explain things, but we'll also be here till midnight if we do that. So we'll move on to decision making. And the whole idea of decision making is that it makes you deal with grey areas, which is a lot of medicine. So there is some new stuff in here, but actually it's kind of a bit of a rehash of the verbal reasoning and a bit of a rehash of the quantitative and the abstract all put together. But whereas all the other ones had answers to questions, this one sometimes doesn't. So years and years ago, this looked completely different. Back in 2016, where you saw they removed the score for that year, it was a completely different exam, and it was called decision analysis. And you had to basically decode these like weird codes where they'd give you like a series of numbers. Let me just turn off the whiteboard. I think somebody's trying to make some notes, but it's coming up for everyone. Thank you. I think somebody was just trying to make their own notes, but it was coming up for the whole 50 odd people. But yeah, so the whole idea of this, and of all of them, I think this one really does relate to medicine, because a lot of medicine isn't black and white, it's all gray. And that's why I think medicine's interesting. You know, you actually have to think and think what's the best fit rather than just getting an answer. So 29 questions, 31 minutes. You get about 64 seconds a question. And what you're doing is you're basically either deducing reasoning, evaluating arguments, statistical reasoning, or figural reasoning. And you can see it here, deductive, evaluating, these are your verbal reasoning, statistical is your quantitative, and figural is kind of going towards your quantitative and a little bit of abstract. So what we would say to do is, first of all, establish what is true beyond reasonable doubt. What do you know is true? So you've got the facts in your head. And this is the same as when you approach a patient. You know, the patient has a temperature. The patient has, you know, consolidation on their chest x-ray. The patient has infection markers on their blood. You know those bits are true. Then what could be true and what could be false? So the patient reports that they had aches and pains. We don't know that that's true. We just know that they said that. Do you see what I mean? So we can kind of think that could be true, that could be false. Then we'll go through some of the common tricks they use. So again, look for those. Remember, like with your decision analysis, your verbal reasoning, we talked about how they use mitigation, contradiction. They might put some decoys in there, those sorts of things. Check the language. You know, look for where they've put ambiguity in. And then look for the best answer. Normally, there won't be an answer that just absolutely fits. But of the answers you've been given, there's one that fits better with all the information put together as a whole. This takes practice to get used to. Remember, like we said, the strategy we talked about, look for those keywords. Don't assume anything. In the verbal reasoning, we said you shouldn't assume anything. But here, because it's a grey area, it's actually a lot easier to make assumptions. You're looking for those explicitly stated things. And then also get used to drawing the conclusions from maths questions and get used to some of the tricks that they use. And then we'll move on to the SJT. So this is a really interesting section. I saw, just before I started talking, I saw a question pop up about how different sections relate to you being a doctor. And this one is really, really common because actually at the end of your medical school training, you have to sit another situational judgment test. It's much longer and much more in depth, but that determines 50% of your overall grade for medical school. So the first 50% is done by your exams, whether you've got any publications, whether you've got any other degrees and training, and then this one exam determines the whole other 50%. And it's all situational judgment. And so it's basically assessing your character and whether or not you make the right decisions that a doctor should be making. So it's very new. And as I say, we didn't used to use it. When I applied, people said we consider it, but it isn't used in our rankings and our scoring systems. Nowadays, it gets you quite a lot of points in certain universities. And as I say, a band 4 is becoming a do not apply type scenario. Not everywhere, but in some places. They're going to look at ethical dilemmas, moral dilemmas, emotional situations, and also some of those key skills that you should have a doctor, like integrity, honesty, and teamwork. And the scenarios will involve that, and you have to say how you would respond. 67 questions in 20 scenarios with 27 minutes. So you get 23 seconds per question, but because they're over set scenarios, the questions become quite quick because you already have read the scenario. And actually, this is the least time pressured section of the whole exam. You do it at the end, and it is actually a little bit of a time to relax and breathe because it's not anywhere near as time pressured as the other 4 sections. So there's 2 types of question. First of all, can you make the appropriate response to a scenario? So they'll give you a scenario and they'll give you a response to that scenario. And you have to say, is that the right thing to do? Is that the wrong thing to do? Is that okay? Is that just a little bit bad? And kind of score it across. And then the other one is where they give you an action and you say, is it important to do that action or is it not important to do that action? So again, never assume anything. There's a theme here. You shouldn't make assumptions about things. And also don't use any prior knowledge. The idea is when you do the SJT, you shouldn't need any medical knowledge to sit the paper. Having a little bit of an idea of how sort of like basic science and things work can help. In terms of medical knowledge, you shouldn't need any. So don't think, well, when I did my work experience, I saw this happen and therefore I think it might be that with like this. What you actually want to think is, what is the textbook way of dealing with the situation? Because we all know in real life, things don't always go the way that they should do. And so there's this really big thing. And when you come to sit this exam at the end of medical school, this is what they will absolutely drum into you. It's not what you would do, it's what you should do. And a really common example is when they'll say things like, somebody needs to have a look at some blood results and ask if they can just jump onto your computer to look at them. Really, really common. And in real life, most people would be like, yeah, of course you can. In exam situations, that is an absolute no-no. You know, they're accessing patient information under your details. If they do anything, you're the one who's culpable. It's a data breach, etc., etc., etc. And so it's always what should you do, not would you actually do in real life. You have to think of what is the exact textbook response based on, you know, good character, honesty, integrity, and looking at the different ethical situations and things like that. Something else that people don't realize is the questions are independent. So you'll be going through your scenario and you'll have, say, 4 or 5 questions. The next one shouldn't be influenced by the one before. So if you've answered something to one part of it, ignore that and don't think about it in the next one. And with that as well, it's important to remember there's no pattern to these. As with all questions, you might go very appropriate, very appropriate, very appropriate, very inappropriate. And that's fine. Don't think, oh, because I said very appropriate last time, this one can't be appropriate. And what people struggle with normally isn't saying whether something's right or wrong. Most people know this is a right thing, this is a wrong thing. It's saying, is that a very, very appropriate thing? Or is that kind of appropriate, but it's got a downside? And vice versa, is that very wrong? Or is that just kind of wrong? Because effectively, they are right and wrong answers. Saying something's very appropriate or kind of appropriate is still one's right, one's wrong. And so you need to make sure that you are actually really thinking about, is that very appropriate or just kind of appropriate? As we say, try and stay impartial and don't be influenced. Remember that answers aren't complete. So what we mean by that is that you're not saying that you're only going to do this. You're saying that this would be a very good thing to do in the context of the whole scenario. So don't be thinking, well, that can't be very appropriate because actually I need to do X, Y, and Z as well, and I haven't done that, so it's kind of appropriate, if that makes sense. And is it an overall positive, a mix, or an overall negative? So that was almost timed perfectly. Somebody's just asked, how do you differentiate between the very appropriate and the kind of appropriate? And this is how I've always done it. So look at what you're doing. Is what you're doing overall 100% positive or 100% negative? If that's the case, go for the strong, very appropriate, very inappropriate. Or can you think that that's very positive, but you can think of better things to do? Or you think that there's a downside to what you're doing? If that's the case, that's when you go for those middle ones, the kind of appropriate and kind of inappropriate. And the one thing I would say is that if you are struggling with these, there's a way of thinking about these types of questions, and the more you do, the more you get used to them. And similarly, the more that you do your work experience and experience medicine, it becomes much more routine, because the ethical scenarios you deal with day in, day out, the incidents at work you deal with day in, day out, the emotion and all those sorts of things become much easier. So somebody's asked for an example. You might say, for example, that you are on work experience in an operating theatre, the surgeon's been called in, and as he comes in, you think you can smell alcohol. Okay, this is a really common scenario. And then they'll give you 4 or 5 different things that they'll ask you your reactions to that. So for example, it might be to ignore it because you don't want to. That would be very inappropriate. It might be that you talk to somebody about it, but neither of you mention it. So that might be a kind of inappropriate thing. Then it might be that you mention it to the nurse in charge, but similarly, they also don't do anything about it. That might be a kind of appropriate thing. You've reported it to someone senior, but they still haven't done anything about it. And then calling somebody senior and ensuring that the operation doesn't go ahead would be a very appropriate thing. So hopefully that kind of clarifies what they're looking for, because ultimately patient safety was at risk, and so you had to make a very clear statement there. Okie dokie. So that hopefully was a little bit of a rundown of all 5 sections, and it really was a whistle-stop tour. It really, really is difficult to summarize everything. We wanted to give lots of information and lots of tips in a really short space of time. So usually we don't really do webinars and online stuff. We normally do a lot of like local colleges and schools and sixth forms, as well as like private tutoring. But this year with COVID and things, we really wanted to open up what we were doing to lots of other people. As working doctors, you can imagine that the incentive to do this is much more just to help people out. And so a few people asked us, so we said we could do an online course, which we had 20 spaces for on each of these. And people seemed to think it was popular, so we wanted to offer it out. We've tried to price it really competitively. We've basically just covered costs of things like the website and people to help out, as well as the doctors that are going to help us deliver it, because we want it to be very doctor driven. Anything you do with us is always doctors. We'll never have medical students or people who are just kind of helping out. So if you think that with the information you've got and the online resources, you will be fine, that's fine. And we encourage you, we'll happily answer questions, but the course is there. If you want to spend a day just going through everything, going through mocks, really breaking down what's right, what's wrong, and how you can improve your score, the offer's there. So we've got the 5th and the 12th of July. As you say, you can see the spaces there. And similarly, for all of you guys who have got involved today, we've put a discount code on, so it's only £50, which when we were comparing it to like the medic course, we were charging 159, and most people are sort of 80 to 100, which we just thought was extortionately expensive. We just wanted to offer it out there. So I know the chat's been going mental, and Sharon's been trying to keep up the best he can. But if anybody has any questions specifically that you want us to answer, please do pop them in the chat. I know that there were lots of questions that I spotted on Instagram and things like that, where people are asking where to apply with different types of scores. And obviously we don't know whether or not the online aspect is going to change the skew of the scores this year. We might see an increase, we might see a decrease. We don't know. What we do know is that things like interviews are going to be much harder this year. Georges have already said that they're going to do theirs online. We don't know if other places are going to do that, which will mean that they don't have the flexibility they usually do. And so they might use things like UCAT and BMAT a little bit more. And so I would say be really careful with if you're at the lower limit of somewhere, and maybe score yourself a little bit more comfortably. If there's places you're interested in though, have a look online. So I mentioned it in the chat, there's two things I would do. Look online. Some places are really, really honest about how they use your UCAT score and things like that. Birmingham, for example, will literally has an offer calculator, and you put in your grades, you put in your grades, you put in all the information you've got, you put in your UCAT score, and they tell you whether or not they would probably give you an interview and an offer. And so places like that are really honest. Some people are a little bit more hidden, but the other thing is Freedom of Information Act. So if you Google, say, a university like Imperial, and then their entrance exams and freedom of information, normally people have requested it. Now, that'll be obviously for years in the past, and they can change, but it gives you a good idea of a baseline. Perfect. So I'll have a look at the chat, and then I don't know if Chara wants to pick up a couple of questions.
Yes, I think one of the questions we've just been asked is, if you'd like to take part in the online course, do you need to have started practicing already? It's never too early to start, especially now. It's a matter of months. What we'd say is we're actually going to be sending everyone who's doing the online course, and we've sent some people this out already, is a mock test to do. Ideally, we'd like to send it out about 2 weeks in advance. It will be a time-pressured mock that we'd like you to do at home. And then in the first section of the course, where we'll be going through different strategies, we'll be using examples and going through your mock exam as well to go through what your answers are. So it gives you an indication of how you're doing. And also just so you can get a feel for different strategies. We don't expect you to score highly or score anything in particular in the mock. The mock is just a flavor for you. So you've got a flavor doing the questions in time-pressured manner. And then what we'll be doing is we'll be going through lots of different sections, every single section with examples and with questions that you'll be able to do. I think Travis has also posted the link for the course. In terms of the actual course, so we had lots of Instagram messages in the past few minutes now about the course. It was something that we'd only designed initially for people where we'd already organized school tutoring, or where we'd said that, okay, because we already tutor people. So we do one-to-one coaching on different sections. And as a result, we then actually set up this webinar for a few of our tutees. That's why we're saying we've only got 12 places on one, 8 on the other left. But that's why we've opened it up to everyone. So if you would like to take part, we can send you the mock 2 weeks before the course. Although sometimes people want it a bit earlier, we can do that as well. And then we can go through the things. In terms of the actual course, is it one-to-one tutoring, group tutoring? So we've limited the number of people to 20 for each course, and that's on purpose because the questions with the mock, which you've done at home, we'll be going through them in the morning session, and we'll be going through the strategies. And then what we're doing in the afternoon, is going through each different section with new questions that you haven't come across. So that'll be you as an individual. Rather than breaking out in groups, what we're doing is we'll be displaying questions in a time-pressured manner, or we'll send you a PDF of those questions, and you then have to try and calculate them, and then we'll go through the strategies you can use to make sure you do well in them. It is not, we wouldn't call it group tutoring as such, because most of the courses people go to are where you might have 100 people, or you might have 200 people, and these are ones we were mentioning earlier. So like Medic 40, you might have 100 people at a course. That doesn't really, we feel that it doesn't really give you the individual experience. This, on the other hand, we want it to be something exclusive, and that's why it was something which we initially just did for the people we're doing coaching with. You'll have an experience and exposure of questions prior to doing the course. And you'll have those questions, and it's actually after, during the course, you get more questions and examples of strategies to use. So it's a nice mixture.
Excellent. Other people watching you take the test at the test centre. So yes, there are actually. It's kind of like, if you've ever done your driving theory, it's the same. So you go to this test centre, you go through all your ID, you have to empty your pockets, and then you go in and you're sat like at a cubicle with the walls kind of with the felt dividers, with normally the oldest computer in the world in front of you. and you don't touch anything, they'll kind of start the application up. So when you start, it will just appear there. And then there's somebody watching you outside, and also they're watching all of your screens as well, so they can see what you're doing. So there's a camera on you, and they're observing your screen. So that's how they assess it at the test centre. Obviously, it's the first year for the proctors, so we don't quite know, but I assume it'll be the same sort of technology. I came from Imperial, and I know they do a lot of their exams online. They were the first university this year to do their finals online, and they used to issue us with like iPads with this application installed, and basically they could see what you were doing, and it locked so you couldn't go into anything else. So I imagine it'll be in that sort of type of technology. Should we be doing extra? So should we be doing extra medical or caretaker work experience to form a better application? Work experience is a big thing. We're currently working on a piece of work about work experience, but there was some really interesting paid work experience that came out this week. That's like £100 for a day, which I thought was disgusting because, I mean, sorry, I'm ranting here, but as a doctor, to be charging £100 a day to people who are still at like trying to get into medicine, I think is exactly what we were against, because the whole idea of work experience is that you experience it, you see how you feel, see how you find it, and you can't do that if you're paying to be there, in our opinion. But look at things like the Brighton and Sussex Medical School have got their virtual work experience. There's Observed GP, which have been endorsed by the Medical Schools Council. So they're saying that they will count towards your application. And then look for other things in the community. So as coronavirus hopefully starts to die down, look for things like volunteering, care homes, even just working in teams and in shops and things. They value all of that. I interviewed for Imperial for about 5 years, and we never really sort of ranked people. I've had people do the operating theatre live. We had somebody who even did like an open university degree to show their commitment. And although we were very impressed, it didn't necessarily make them rank above anyone else, which, considering that they'd spent hundreds or even thousands for the degree, it didn't necessarily change that, because the whole idea is you want to make sure that they just have this idea. The whole idea of work experience is that you're not going to get a year, 2, 3 years down the line and then go, actually, I don't want to do this anymore because it's not for me. It's just to make sure you understand what you're letting yourself into, because it's a very different career to other places. Do I have any tips for the BMAT? I do. So we're trying to keep our webinar series going, and next Wednesday we're going to do the BMAT one. So keep an eye out on Instagram, and we'll email everybody who signed up today with the email, the link to the BMAT one as well. But effectively next week we're going to do a BMAT one, going through kind of a whistle-stop tour like this of everything that we would advise for the BMAT. Okie dokie. So hopefully that was good. If you've got any other questions, either drop us an Instagram DM or drop us an email. As I say, we said this last week, the whole idea of these sessions and the whole idea of us doing webinars and things, as well as to give you guys some information, is to build up this kind of community of people. You guys are all applying for medicine this year, which means that you'll all effectively be medical students together, and you'll all effectively be doctors together, which is exciting. And because of that, you're kind of building up this community of helping each other out. It was great to see in the chat people kind of trying to help each other as well, where we're trying to talk and type at the same time. And because you're already building this community, and on Instagram, we're already starting to see people kind of helping each other out and responding to things. And that's really great, because it builds up this community of people. And as I say, we hope that we can help you all become doctors, because later on down the line, you're all going to be doctors that we're going to work with. And so it means that we know the best people are becoming doctors.
Somebody's also just private message asking about interview questions. So closer to the interviews, we will be coming on to things you can do, and there will be an interview webinar. The interviews are usually done between November time and March time, but this year we think a lot of them might be online. And just to pick up on the work experience thing that Travis had mentioned. So it is really important, the work experience, particularly if you're doing work experience, you want to be actually feeling the experience. You want to be in a hospital, you want to be in a voluntary place, you want to be in a healthcare system. You want to actually be able to feel that. And that's what we pick up on. So when we're reviewing personal statements in terms of all universities, what we look at is, are people reflecting on the experiences that they've had? Have they been able to see something stressful? Have they been able to see how doctors are working under pressure? And actually, it might be sometimes you see things that you don't like, and it's about how you've coped with that, or a stressful experience, or where something's gone wrong, or where something's gone well. Whereas you can't really do that by watching a presentation or paying someone £100 to give you a lecture on cases. So it is quite unique. And in terms of the interviews that we've done, it's very apparent where it's fine if you haven't been able to get work experience, and there are people like that. And we've interviewed people, both of us, who've got in. So I've interviewed Newcastle or Durham University, and commonly at Durham, we've had people who had no work experience, and it can be challenging for people to get that. But actually, then it's about making the most of the opportunities that you've had. So Duke of Edinburgh, being able to volunteer, excelling in extracurricular activities. And these are all things that you can do to really boost your application. And in terms of other preparation, I'm not sure, Travis might have answered this about the BMAT, but the BMAT is something which requires probably a bit more preparation, especially if you haven't done some of the sections. So if you haven't done physics, for example, which most people haven't at A level, or you haven't done maths, then it's quite important that you start revising early for the 3 sections, particularly section 1. You really need to be good at in terms of maths, and it's similar to the quantitative analysis almost. There is a slight bit of overlap. Whereas section 2 of the BMAT, that's the one where you need to be able to apply a bit of science and know some theories. Again, it's all to do with preparation.
Excellent. So a couple of people I can see, my email is going mad. A few people have already signed up for the course. We kind of made a decision between Sharon and I that we're going to leave it until tomorrow afternoon, roughly, before we advertise this anywhere else, because we wanted to give the people who were interested enough to come to the webinar the chance to sort of sign up. And I know people might need to organize it and talk to people, see if they're free. So we'll leave it until tomorrow afternoon. But it's great to see that people are already signing up, and hopefully we can help you through. So hope everyone has a really good evening. And we will speak to you probably next week for the BMAT webinar. But as I say, any questions, feel free to drop us a line. Excellent.
Brilliant. Thank you for attending. Take care. Bye.